Boom Chanka, how's it going, everybody? It's the Flying Pig here on Flying Pig United, joined by my brother Tom over his stateside in his lovely looking wife beater there. What does that say?
Stupidity. Oh, it's one. Stupidity's not a crime. You're free to go.
Nice one. Is that directed
I
at
can't
you?
even take myself serious. I can see myself in the wife beater, and I can't even take myself serious. So, anyway.
Well, at least it's red.
Let's get going. Yeah.
it's not a flattering angle for you this right now, mate. It looks like you've got like meatloaf bitch tits in Fight Club, and you're wearing like some sort of a sports bra.
Oh, really? Is it really? That's good. You know what's really hard? You know what's genuinely hard? Training for a marathon. That is not easy. It's harder than you'd think. Running like 13 miles is like a week warm up and get the miles in isn't easy, by the way. Especially when you're 16.5 stone. It's very difficult.
Sounds like a bad idea to me, mate.
I can't believe I said to do it. I've got 5 weeks until the actual marathon. It's the Twin Cities Marathon. It's one of the best marathons in America. It's actually like you run from Minneapolis to St. Paul and you run over the bridge and you go from basically real downtown Minneapolis, like kind of metropolitan, like what you'd see in movies, and then you run to St. Paul, which is an older city, and it's got like this Capitol building. So it's a pretty sick marathon. So
sounds pretty awesome. You better get training then, mate, because 16.5 stone, crikey.
I've been training. Well, I'm not going to lose weight. I'm just got.
Well, you should.
Well, you know what, mate. Have a look in the mirror.
No, I'm not saying look, I outweigh you by stones. I'm saying that for a marathon, you want to just lean down, don't you? Get as svelte as possible.
That's not my body type, is it?
You know, Mo Farah's not got an ounce of fat on him, has he? He's also about 8 stone.
neither, I don't have an ounce of fat on me either, so.
All right.
We're good.
Okay. Your bitch tits say otherwise, mate.
I came on here to talk about football, not to be insulted. I'm literally this close to taking my shirt off right now.
You might have to, mate, just to prove that you don't have them. Do you know what I mean?
Well, hang on. I'm not that confident I don't. So it's like, the worst thing would be I pull them out and it's like, yeah. Then I get all down the thread saying, oh, put your tits away. Like,
boycott.
What is this? Yeah. So
boycott.
I don't know. Hang on. Yeah. Decent.
Maybe later. What has happened in the last 24 hours, I suppose, is there was a show with Roy Keane and Gary Neville on where they were sort of talking about their time at Manchester United, and there was some quite controversial subjects that came up, particularly from Roy Keane, and pressed on it. He definitely opened up and talked a lot about his time at the end of Manchester United.
Did he open up, really?
Well, I thought they did.
I got more. So I listened to it during my 6-mile run I just did a couple of hours ago. So I got pretty much the whole thing. So if I missed it, it was 1 hour 25 was what I found anyway. If it's longer than that, whatever. But I listened to about an hour of it. And I thought you got more information from Gary Neville about the situation than actually Roy Keane. Gary Neville was talking about how horrific that meeting was, but Roy Keane kind of brushed over that player meeting quite a bit. You know what? Here's what I'd say about Roy Keane. He does come across negative, but I think he's just extremely passionate and really cares and can't control his emotions sometimes, obviously, right? I think that's pretty obvious. He has trouble with that. And I think he's right when he said that he wouldn't have sacked Roy Keane. Gary Neville asked a real good question. It was really funny because the presenter was trying to jump in with a question, and Gary Neville was like...
Oh, he absolutely mugged him off, didn't he?
It's totally mugged him off. It's like, my question's going to be better. Shut up. Basically, he just wants to get his point across. And
that interview was a dick, by the way. It's like you've got Roy Keane and Gary Neville on the sofa. They're trying to talk. Just let them talk. Why? Nobody wants to hear from you, you speculator twat.
Exactly. But Gary Neville said, Roy Keane, the manager, would have sacked Roy Keane, the player. And Roy Keane disagreed. And I think Roy Keane was actually right there because they kind of alluded to the fact that Roy Keane was always that way, but it's so much easier to get away with that when you're 27, 28 best holding midfielder in the world.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he would have been more key to Manchester United earlier on in his career, 27, 28, at 34 years of age. So Alex Ferguson, maybe. I sort of agree with what Roy Keane was saying, though, if it happened the way that Roy Keane said it, which is the way they tried to sort of usher him out after that whole MUTV interview, and where he just ripped into to the players basically. But I agree with him. I mean, what is he supposed to say if they were that bad? He gave his personal opinion and account of it. Maybe as such a senior figure in the squad, he should have been a little bit more, keep his cards closer to his chest.
Tactful.
Yeah, tactful. But at the same time, he's a real person.
That's not Roy Keane.
Exactly, he's a real person. He literally says what's on his mind most of the time. He doesn't pull any punches. And Alex Ferguson is the same sort of guy. So when you get two people like that coming together, then it's obviously going to cause a few sort of conflicts and friction and things like that. And the way that Roy Keane discussed it and said that Sir Alex Ferguson gave him this, statement, they're basically going to terminate the contract. Which, when you think about the impact and the work that Roy Keane put into Manchester United, to not have the proper send off, to not leave at the end of our season or leave under his own terms, is kind of, it does leave a bad taste in the mouth even for me. Because look, Roy Keane said some controversial things at the time, which maybe he shouldn't have said, but he was such a huge player for United for well over a decade, 12 and a half years, as he pointed out in that video. It's like, why the hell would they not just let Roy Keane stay at the club? He must have been such a negative influence in that dressing room, but then for 10, 11 years, he was such a positive influence in that dressing room. So, I think
that can happen, though. That can happen. And like I said, when he was the top player in the team, it's a little bit different. Fergie probably liked him digging players out. But when he didn't command that same respect, and again, like I said before, he was always respected to the end. It can become negative. And remember, you had young players coming through, Ronaldo, Rooney. I know Ferguson has said in his book that there were players that said to him, they couldn't wait for them to be good enough. They weren't good enough. Well, I think that was Roy Keane that said that. I think he wanted to win now, and I think Fergie realised that, okay, I've got to kind of develop these young boys. And also you have players like, I know Roy Keane had a bit of a go at Van der Sar in that show and everything like that. And I think that, a guy like Roy Keane, a general like that, they don't go out at the end of the season to stand and applause, stuff like that. You live by the sword, you die by the sword. And that's just the way it is. If he would have been around, it would have just got atrocious. And Gary Neville said that meeting was horrific. I believe it was completely just terrible.
It's a screaming match, basically, yeah.
Oh, I can imagine.
Can you imagine Roy Keane and Alex Ferguson having a screaming match?
Yeah, and you can't have that in front of players, and you can't have that in a club. And you know how crazy Man United were back then. I wish they were like it now, but I heard it this morning. I was driving to work and I was listening to Gary Neville on Sky Sports, and they were talking about the England camp. And basically, it was just like, okay, yeah, it's probably blown out of proportion because Real Madrid and Barcelona players don't get on either, but they won a World Cup together. But he admitted, I didn't trust anyone outside my circle. If you're a Man United player, we were Man United players. Anyone else was just, we didn't want to know them. We didn't trust them. They were acquaintances. That was it. And we stuck to our own, and we were that tunnel vision on Man United being successful that anyone else, whether it be Lampard, whether it be Gerrard, whether it be these players like that, just essentially we didn't want to give them an inch of anything. We didn't want them to know us because they may see a chink in the armour. And that was Manchester United's, the winning mentality that they had was crazy. And Roy Keane was obviously a massive part of that. But in a club and an environment and a culture like that, you can't have that general that's gone AWOL. And that's what he did. And again, a guy like him was never, ever going to go out to a song and dance at the end of the season. It just wouldn't happen. And I kind of love Roy Keane for that. That's kind of...
one thing that I took away from that were a couple of things. Obviously, he's still very bitter about Sir Alex Ferguson and what happened at the end of United. Very, very bitter. And there was one point he actually says, I don't hold grudges. It's like, hang on a fucking second. If anybody holds grudges, it's you. Yeah. Alfinger Haaland knows you hold grudges.
Exactly. Yeah. He didn't mean for that to sound like a joke.
That's what's another thing that I took away from it. Roy Keane is a funny motherfucker. Like, he doesn't even mean to be. He's just naturally sinister and hilarious. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, he is. He's fucking sinister. He's an animal. He's brilliant. Yeah. But what a player. It's so funny thinking back to when he played at the top level. And I'm not just talking about how he controlled games in the Premier League and just got United over the line time and time again. I watched that Juventus game it's probably about 6 months ago when I actually watched the whole game. I was on YouTube. I had nothing going on. It was there, the full game. It was like, oh, this was pretty cool. I can watch the full game from 99 semi-final, second leg. And I can't even, it's so weird to think back because it didn't even register with me at the time. The players that were in that Juventus team, the players that were in that Juventus midfield, that Roy Keane just dominated that night. We're talking Zidane. We're talking, who else was in that team? God, they had so many of these crazy names. And that's why I can't even remember them now. They didn't matter because he just absolutely... He took over the game. He really did. And it wasn't like he took over the game and that they died. We were 2-0 down in that game in Turin. And he absolutely bossed it. I mean, that has got to be... And I remember a Republic of Ireland game against the Netherlands when he literally just... Netherlands had a good team back then. That they really did. This was around, obviously, his time when they had the quality players. And Netherlands were a real World Cup contender. And he just took over a game. It was a playoff game. I think it may have been the one McAteer scored that famous goal for Ireland. And Roy Keane in that game was just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And he was an amazing player, but his mentality was such. And it was an interesting thing. Him and Alex Ferguson will never, ever sit down and have a beer together or anything like that. But I'll be really interested to see Roy Keane's reaction. This sounds horrible and morbid, but Alex Ferguson's how old?
Late 70s, isn't he? So mid 70s. He's had some health problems recently.
Yeah. So when he does pass, which hopefully isn't for a long time, but when he does, I will be very interested to see if Roy Keane says anything publicly about him, because I think it may boil down to, at that stage, God, I mean, I know we had our differences, but what a guy, what a manager. And I think that will end up being the case with Roy Keane and Alex Ferguson, kind of like the way it was with Brian Clough and Peter Taylor. When you think, Roy Keane seems to get on well with the class of 92. He doesn't really have bad words to say about Giggsy, Beckham, Scholes, the Neville brothers. They always seem to be very cordial and get on. And if you speak to any of them guys, you mention the word Alex Ferguson and their eyes light up like best manager ever, best manager ever. Beckham had a falling out with him. Beckham will be the first to say best manager ever. Just unbelievable. And Roy Keane's even said before, when he's asked about his time at Manchester United, not too long ago, he said it was perfect club, perfect manager. So there is that respect there, even though he is bitter. I just think it's one of those things where Roy Keane was the general. I'm sorry to keep using that word, but it's just the best way to describe it. He was the guy on the field doing it, and they were. Gary Neville said it. They were mirrors of each other, weren't they? And then Alex Ferguson had to move him on, and that was probably an excuse to move him on. I believe it wasn't as bad. I've never seen that actual interview. Have you?
Maybe years and years ago. I can't remember what he says or anything, but I'm sure he ripped into certain players.
Negative.
I think he was basically saying they're lacking the heart and the fight and the desire out there, that sort of thing. Which is absolutely fair enough. It's literally nowhere near as bad as any of the stuff we say about the players, but because he's the general, as you say, he's got to obviously be a bit more tactful, I suppose. But that was the beginning of the end for his time at Manchester United. That I took that away from that interview as well, that I thought he is quite cold. Roy Keane, like the way he talked about Sir Alex Ferguson when the interviewer asked him, have you thought about speaking to him maybe since he's had that ill health and all this stuff? He's just like, no, absolutely not. If he apologises to me, when he apologises to me, I'll speak to him. But he's not spoken to him since that day where they handed in that statement and, they got the ball rolling for him to leave the club. So that goes to show you the sort of grudges that he's holding here, because Sir Alex Ferguson worked with him for a number of years, the most successful time in Roy Keane's career, obviously. I know he's successful at Nottingham Forest as well before joining, but the longevity at United was all under Sir Alex Ferguson. So even from a mutual respect point of view, from a old time sake point of view, you would think that maybe he would like to reach out an olive branch when Sir Alex Ferguson was taken ill, but no, he just doesn't want to do that. He's very cold, I think, but he's like a Terminator. Yeah, he is. He really is. I love him for it.
He's a very interesting chap, isn't he? He really is.
He's the sort of guy, though, if it turned out like he just murdered a bunch of people, you really wouldn't be that surprised. Like, no offense, Roy. Come on.
I don't know. I don't think it's he's just obsessed with. They all are at that level, but he takes it to a new level, which is why he was so successful, which is why he was perfect for Ferguson and Manchester United. And like I said, if you really had him being honest, I think he'd probably say a few different things as well. But again, he's just very bitter, and he probably just wants Ferguson to reach out to him and probably apologise, you know.
Yeah.
And then that was kind of that. But obviously, Alex Ferguson's never going to do that. So it's one of those things.
I say they're both just too hard-headed, aren't they?